Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So I just want to say thank you so much for waiting. I know it's been quite some time since I uploaded a video, but I was waiting because I wanted to do a full week of videos for you guys, and that definitely takes a lot of time. Some of the videos are going to be longer than others, and all of these are cases that really just have stuck with me ever since I first heard about them, and this case that I'm doing today is no different. This case reminds me a lot of my own family member's murder. So I was outraged when I heard about this case because to me there is so much that is off about this case. My family member was also murdered in Colorado where this case happened, and just out of curiosity I wanted to see where it was in terms of where my family member was murdered, how far away, and sure enough it was maybe 2 hours away, I believe. And there was a lot of corruption and weird things happening in my family member's case. So it doesn't surprise me that we're seeing what we're seeing when we look at this case. And so I definitely wanted to raise awareness on this case. I wanted to talk about it. I think more people should know about her story. I know that people have already covered this case, but again, I wanted to give my spin on it and hopefully create another conversation because this story is important and I think we just need to be raising awareness on it at this point. So without further delay, we're going to be talking about the unsolved murder of Candace HILTZ. Candace HILTZ was born on December 22nd, 1988 in Canyon City, Colorado. Now, when Candace was only 5 years old, her father sadly passed away, so Candace never really got to know him. However, she was extremely close with the rest of her family, especially her mother, Dolores. From a young age, it was clear that Candace was incredibly intelligent. She was actually described as being a child prodigy, and by the age of 11, Candace was already mastering calculus. From a young age, Candace set high goals for herself, and she really knew what she wanted to do in life. She wanted to enter law, and she wanted to eventually become a Supreme Court justice. When Candace reached her teenage years, she was described as being a tomboy who was interested in bodybuilding, and Candace was also described as having a girly side. She loved jewelry and specifically collected necklaces with beads in them. Those who knew her also described Candace as being funny, headstrong, loyal, and fiercely passionate about what she believed in. Candace, from an early age, stood up to bullies and strongly opposed any type of mistreatment against others. She believed in justice and goodness and stood up for those who needed it. One of her classmates, Melody Nielsen, went on to say, quote, "She saw something good in me when I didn't even like myself. She gave me a chance, got to know me, and was the first popular kid I ever knew that took the time to befriend a non-popular kid." End quote. When you're a kid or a teen, it's easy to stand by and watch when bullying takes place due to peer pressure or out of fear of being bullied yourself. But that wasn't Candace. She always stood her ground every time and she never backed down. It's also easy when you're a kid or a teen to put your focus on anything but school and homework. However, Candace took her education very seriously and finished high school early and enrolled in Brigham Young University. However, when she was just 16 years old, Candace hit a small bump in the road when she found out that she was pregnant. Now, this might have led some people to give up some of their goals or completely change the course of their life, but again, Candace was determined and motivated. She was extremely excited about being a mother and put her schooling on hold, and Candace could afford it. At just 17 years old, Candace was already in her third year of college. In September of 2005, Candace gave birth to a beautiful baby girl and named her Paige. Even though Candace was excited and was ready to embrace motherhood, doctors quickly informed her that Paige suffered from a condition called hydrocephalus, which is a condition where there is a buildup of fluids deep within the brain. Due to this buildup, an enormous amount of pressure is put on the brain and can lead to headaches, double vision, seizures, poor balance, irritability, and problems with walking and talking. In Paige's case, there was a buildup of cerebrospinal fluid, and doctors told Candace that Paige wouldn't live for more than a few days. But once again, Candace remained optimistic and hopeful. She showered Paige with love, and her daughter not only lived through the first few days, but she was also doing much better than doctors initially predicted. Even though Paige was doing well, doctors told Candace that Paige would most likely live a very short life. This news was obviously devastating for Candace, but she was determined to spend every possible moment with her daughter. Over the next few months, Candace spent all of her time with Paige. She loved to go for long walks with Paige around the family's property, and she treated every week like it was Paige's birthday. Shortly after Paige was born, Candace decided to continue her schooling, and she enrolled in an online program at Brigham Young University so that she could continue her studies and raise and care for Paige at the same time. Also around this time, Candace received some incredibly exciting news when she got an acceptance letter from Stanford Law, which was one step closer towards her realizing her ultimate goal of becoming a Supreme Court justice. However, everything changed for Candace on August 10th, 2006. At some point during that day, Fremont County Sheriff's Deputy Robert Dodd arrived at the HILTZ family home and asked to speak with Candace's older brother, James. At the time, James was not home, so Deputy Dodd spoke to Dolores, Candace's mother, and Candace listened in. According to Deputy Dodd, James was involved with a trespassing incident and was wanted for questioning. Now, Dolores explained to him that James had a long history of mental illness and had anthropophobia, which is basically a fear of people. So it's a little bit more intense than having social anxiety. This is a condition where you are actually afraid of being around other people. You are fearful of them. Dolores told Deputy Dodd that James did not even live with them in the family home and that he lived in a tent behind the family home because he wanted to be by himself. Dolores went on to tell Deputy Dodd that James drifted quite a bit and that he did not work due to his mental illness. Now, we don't really know what exactly was said in this interaction. However, according to Dolores, Candace did not like the way that Deputy Dodd was speaking to her mother, and she did not like the way he was speaking about her brother, whom she was extremely protective of. At some point during the interaction, Candace became very upset and actually began yelling at Deputy Dodd, who threatened to arrest her on the spot. Again, according to Dolores, Candace told Dodd to arrest her and also told him that she had seen him around town taking envelopes from known drug dealers. Candace proceeded to tell Dodd that she would tell his fellow deputies what she had seen. After this heated exchange, Dodd was supposedly extremely angry, stormed out of the house, and never returned to try and follow up with James. And then things continued to get worse for the HILTZ family. A few days after the heated exchange with Deputy Dodd, the HILTZ's family dog Jackson went missing. Since the HILTZ's lived in a remote area, they believed that an animal could have gotten Jackson, but many of them had a very uneasy feeling about it. Some reports allege that Candace even went down to the sheriff's department after Jackson disappeared, and there are also some reports that allege that Candace may have gotten into another argument with Deputy Dodd. However, I could not confirm this in my research, so at this point it's kind of just a rumor. I couldn't double check it and make sure that it was an actual thing, but some reports do say that Candace and Deputy Dodd did have another heated exchange with one another. Since Deputy Dodd had first arrived at their house on August 10th, the HILTZ family was on edge and they were still searching for their missing dog Jackson. And then the unthinkable happened. On August 15th, 2006, Dolores had to run some errands and she was uneasy about leaving Candace and Paige home alone. However, Dolores had to get some things taken care of, so she asked a son of one of their neighbors to check on Candace while she was gone. After making sure that Candace and 11-month-old Paige were settled, Dolores left the family home around noon and was expecting to be gone for a couple of hours. When she left, Dolores had no idea that she would never see her daughter alive again. So when it comes to the events that followed, there is some confusion. I'm not sure why different stories are being reported, but inconsistencies seem to be the #1 pattern in this case. So I just want to let you guys know up front really quick, disclaimer, that there are a lot of conflicting reports out there. It's very hard to get to the bottom of things. I've tried to include everything in this video, so I just wanted to lay that out there because, again, I'm going to be talking about some of the confusion, but some other things I just really couldn't confirm because there's just so much speculation and gossip and rumor. According to an interview that Dolores gave, the son who Dolores asked to check on Candace did go over to the house to check on her but did not see Candace anywhere. Now, he said he heard Paige screaming in her crib and took her back to his home where he waited for Dolores. So no mention of Candace at any point in this story. Dolores stated that she arrived back at the family home at approximately 3:30 p.m. where she saw the son and her neighbors waiting outside for her. Obviously, this was very confusing to her. Why are they standing outside? She was already feeling uneasy. Dolores said she entered the home and saw blood and blood spatter all over the house, but did not immediately see Candace. She went on to say that she ran into a room in the home and that there was blood everywhere and that there was a huge green comforter that was covered in blood underneath the bed in the room. When Dolores unwrapped the green comforter, she saw a horrifying sight. It was her daughter's body. even though 11-month-old Paige was unharmed, Candace had been brutally murdered and had sustained multiple gunshot wounds. Dolores said that she crumbled next to her daughter's body and said that she held her hand, and she immediately called for help, and the authorities arrived shortly after. Now, the two deputies that were assigned to the case were Deputy Bruce Briscoe and Deputy Robert Dodd. So, yes, you heard that right. The same deputy that Candace had had an altercation with a couple of days prior was now one of the deputies in charge of investigating her case. According to Dolores and other eyewitnesses on the scene, the investigation was completely botched and half-assed from the beginning. We don't know if this was intentional or if it was due to absolute incompetence. Officials did not secure the crime scene and they did not seal the home off, which allowed a variety of people to enter and exit the home. Law enforcement barely collected any evidence, and Dolores estimated that they collected around 15 pieces of evidence in total. Law enforcement discovered that the back door of the house had been pried open with a breaker bar and believed that that was how the intruder or intruders gained entry into the home. Now, shortly after arriving at the scene, law enforcement immediately began to point the finger at Candace's older brother, James, and began to imply that he was most likely responsible for Candace's death, which made zero sense to Candace's family since there was no evidence that indicated that James was responsible. After going through the crime scene, law enforcement began to canvass the area and they began to look for any other potential evidence. Even though they supposedly didn't find any other evidence that was linked to Candace's murder, they did find something else that was extremely disturbing. They found the HILTZ's dog, Jackson. Now, when it comes to finding Jackson, there is again two conflicting stories. In one version, it's reported that Jackson was found tied to a tree with a rope and that he had been killed with an axe. I apologize, I know that's difficult. This whole case is difficult, but this is what the information tells us. In the second version, Jackson was found just tied to a tree. Now, when I did my research in another version of this story, I heard that he was bludgeoned to death. Either way, I'm not sure why there are different stories. Regardless of what is the truth, it is absolutely disgusting and despicable, and we do know that someone took the dog and that the dog did not die from an animal and the dog did not die from natural causes. At that point, the family began to wonder if Jackson had been killed and used as a message in an attempt to threaten the family, or if he had been killed to taunt the family. Some began to speculate that an individual killed Jackson because they knew that Jackson was a protective dog and that they didn't want him to get in the way when they came back to attack Candace. Like I said before, regardless of what the motivation was, it's absolutely disgusting. When Candace's autopsy was revealed, and excuse me because I'm going to have to look down a little bit at my notes here, it was shocking. According to the autopsy, Candace had been shot 7 times, with 6 being in the head and 1 in the chest. Candace's head trauma was so severe that she was nearly decapitated. The autopsy also revealed that 3 guns were used in the attack and that Candace had been shot with a shotgun, a medium caliber gun, and a small caliber gun. After looking at the blood spatter, the location of the bullets, and the bullets' trajectories, it was concluded that Candace had been shot in the front and in the back, and that she was shot by at least 2, but possibly 3 individuals. According to the autopsy, there were shell casings from 3 different weapons found at the scene, and bloody towels were found nearby off of 15th Trail. The autopsy also stated that DNA tests were run on the towels and that there was DNA on them that belonged to an unidentified male and it did not belong to a family member. And another strange thing stood out in Candace's autopsy report. According to the report, Candace was discovered by her boyfriend. Now, in this version of the story, the boyfriend entered the home, heard Paige crying, and took her back to his wife so that his wife could watch her, and he then returned back to the home and found Candace under the bed in the comforter, which does not make a whole lot of sense to me, and it did not make sense to Dolores whatsoever. And when she saw the report, she was absolutely confused. She stated that she was the one who found Candace and that the man who had gone to check on Candace was not Candace's boyfriend and that he wasn't married. She stated that the man who checked on Candace was the son of a neighbor of hers. Dolores said that when she arrived back home, her neighbors and their son were waiting outside for her. Dolores stated that she entered the home and that she was the one who found Candace's body. So we have no idea why that is in the autopsy report, because They're saying that Candace's boyfriend found her, took Paige out to his wife to go check on his girlfriend. It just makes zero sense. Investigators once again began to question the family, and it was pretty evident from day one that they were focusing in on James. They told the HILTZ family that they were searching for James, but the family was extremely confused about this. Even though James had a history of mental illness, he had no history of violence. The family knew that the back door of the home had been pried open with a breaker bar, which didn't add up to them if James supposedly did it, and they explained why. The HILTZ family told law enforcement that James would keep a butter knife hidden under the front step of the home in order to gain entry through the front door, and explained that he did this because he would only go into the home when no one else was there. When Candace was found, that butter knife was still underneath the front step. If James was trying to get into the house and was supposedly responsible for Candace's murder, why would he pry the back door open when he could gain entry into the home in the way that he usually did? They also informed investigators that James did not own a firearm and he did not have access to any firearms because he didn't have any friends or associates. However, investigators didn't really seem to care about what the HILTZ family had to say about James or his mental illness, and were adamant about James being responsible for Candace's death. When the family was allowed to return back to the home after it had been processed, it became even more evident that investigators didn't conduct a thorough investigation of the crime scene. The home still wasn't sealed off, and the back door of the home was wide open. When Dolores entered the home, she found a shotgun shell in Paige's crib, bullet shells near the fireplace, the blood-soaked comforter that Candace had been wrapped in, and the computer monitor that was used to hold up the bed that Candace was found under, and it was covered in blood. In addition to those crucial pieces of evidence, there were also several bloody towels around the house that were believed to have been used by the killer or killers, and outside of the home was a bloody shirt that Candace had been wearing on the day that she was murdered. So all of these items are pretty crucial pieces of evidence, and it's unknown why investigators wouldn't collect these items for further testing, considering they were linked to a very brutal, unsolved homicide. Again, was it horrible, lazy police work done by law enforcement officials who were completely incompetent, or were all of those obvious mistakes intentional? After the family saw these items, they immediately knew that something was off and gathered all of the evidence, photographed it, and logged it in order to keep track of everything. Shortly after, Dolores went to the sheriff's department to ask why these critical pieces of evidence were left behind at the scene, but deputies refused to speak with her. After waiting for an extended period of time, a young officer did finally come out and talk to Dolores, and she voiced her concerns to him. However, no one from the sheriff's department called her back, and no one followed up with her. Shortly after, Deputy Briscoe, one of the two investigators who were assigned to Candace's case, arrived at the HILTZ family home with a search warrant and asked for the container of evidence that the family collected. So the same evidence that should have been collected from day one and was irresponsibly and inexplicably left at the crime scene. It was also around this time that the police told the public that they were searching for James HILTZ and stated that they believed he was armed and dangerous with multiple weapons. Again, this was very confusing to the HILTZ family, who insisted that James did not own any firearms and didn't have any access to firearms since he never spent time with any other people. Eventually, on August 18th, just 3 days after the murder, James HILTZ was found camping out in the Copper Gulch mountain area, which is southwest of Canyon City. James's exact location wasn't released, but the Copper Gulch mountain area is about 16 miles away from Canyon City, according to Google Maps. After he was discovered, he was immediately brought in and charged. However, what he was charged with was very odd. Even though James was being accused of murdering his own sister, he wasn't charged with murder and was instead charged with first and second degree burglary and criminal trespassing, in addition to theft and criminal mischief. When they were asked about these charges, law enforcement stated that James had broken into a home and had stolen hatchets and flashlights, but didn't really offer up any other information. James was held on a $500,000 bond, and he was found not guilty by reason of insanity, and he was sent to the Colorado Mental Health Institute at Pueblo, where he is to this day. Every single time that James is up for review, deputies will attend and speak out against his release and state that he is the primary suspect for Candace's murder, even though James has never been officially charged with her murder. James has reportedly made a lot of progress at the Institute and is currently a peer counselor. After Candace's tragic death, and with James being held at the Colorado Mental Health Institute as the main suspect in her murder, the case hit a dead end and the HILTZ family was left with zero answers. However, Dolores refused to give up. In January of 2007, Dolores filed a complaint with the State Attorney General's office and stated that there was mismanagement of the crime scene and provided the photographs that she and her family had taken. In the complaint, Dolores also alleged that one or more members of the sheriff's department could have been directly involved in her daughter's murder. However, once again, Dolores' concerns were dismissed. In the years after Candace's death, Dolores continued to raise and take care of Paige until Paige passed away when she was just 7 years old. Over the next several years, there were no developments in the case until something completely unexpected blew the case wide open. In December of 2016, a local man named Rick Ratzlaff was at an auction. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of the TV show Storage Wars, but it's basically a show that follows buyers who bid on other people's storage units if they failed to make a payment. If a bidder wins the auction, every single piece of property in the unit becomes theirs, and they can either keep it or try to sell it in order to make a profit. This was the exact type of situation that Rick Ratzlaff found himself in. Rick was at the Dawson Mini Ranch storage facility and was looking at several units, and one caught his eye. Rick ended up offering the highest bid, and the unit was sold to him for $50. When Rick went in to check out all the property in the unit that was now technically his, he came across some very disturbing items. He found envelopes that were labeled as evidence, shell casings, an axe, bloody clothes, a bloody piece of rope, and 2 blood-soaked socks. When Rick looked further, he also noticed emergency patrol lights and several brown deputy sheriff's uniforms. When he looked at the uniforms, one name tag kept showing up, and that name tag said Robert Dodd. Yes, Deputy Robert Dodd was the previous owner of the storage unit, and Deputy Robert Dodd was the same investigator that had been assigned to Candace's case, and Deputy Robert Dodd was the same deputy that Candace had had a heated altercation with just days before she was brutally murdered. Rick Ratzlaff immediately thought of the Candace HILTZ case, and he called Sheriff Jim Beaker to report what he had discovered, and things became even more sketchy. Sheriff Jim Beaker showed up at the unit, and Rick actually had his wife record the conversation. At some point during this interaction, Sheriff Beaker noticed a green backpack and told Ratzlaff that it was a piece of evidence in the Candace HILTZ homicide investigation. Now, instead of touching it himself, Sheriff Beaker asked Ratzlaff to handle the backpack and open it, and inside was Candace's bloody shirt that she had been wearing on the day of her murder. Ratzlaff claimed that the interaction became somewhat threatening and stated that he was asked to remain quiet about what he had found in the storage unit, and also stated that Sheriff Jim Beaker threatened him by saying his life could be in danger. Ratzlaff also claimed that Sheriff Beaker asked for the unit, to which Ratzlaff declined. Ratzlaff also stated that one of Robert Dodd's family members reached out to him through Facebook and asked to buy the storage unit back. However, Ratzlaff did not see the message and didn't respond right away because he wasn't active on Facebook. After meeting with Sheriff Beaker, Ratzlaff claimed that the sheriff's department began to harass him and that his cars were impounded for no reason. After the evidence was found in the storage unit, Deputy Robert Dodd was placed on paid administrative leave, and the case was turned over to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. Due to the items that were found in the unit, it's believed that the rope and axe were used to restrain and kill Jackson. And Dolores claimed that the bloody socks and shirt that were found in the unit belonged to Candace, and that Candace was wearing them on the day of her murder. To the HILTZ family, this was proof that the sheriff's department messed up the investigation at the very best, or at the very worst was in some way responsible and involved in a cover-up of some kind. Dolores also believed that this new evidence would finally vindicate James, who had been accused of murdering Candace. Dolores went on to say, quote, "Dodd had to steal the evidence from the basement of the sheriff's office. He did that either to protect himself or someone else," end quote. At this point, the CBI began an investigation into Robert Dodd, and on January 26th, several local media outlets began to cover the story and submitted a Colorado Open Records Act request to try and obtain recordings or transcripts of the 911 phone calls that were made the day that Candace was killed, and the request was denied. The Fremont County Attorney stated, quote, "The sheriff determined that disclosure of the records would be contrary to the public interest, as the records are part of criminal justice investigatory files and are actively being reviewed by law enforcement agencies in connection with an investigation," end quote. On February 2nd, another CORA request was submitted for all police and incident reports regarding the murder of Candace HILTZ, but again, the request was denied for the exact same reason. While all of this was happening, Deputy Bruce Briscoe, who was the other investigator in charge of Candace's case, was also put on paid administrative leave due to an investigation that the CBI was conducting. According to the Fremont County Sheriff's Office, Deputy Briscoe was being investigated for having an inappropriate relationship with an underage student in 1999 while he was working as a drug abuse resistance education officer. The Fremont County Sheriff's Office went on to say that the investigation had nothing to do with the murder of Candace HILTZ and that they were being 100% cooperative with the CBI. Shortly after the news broke and after the investigation was completed, District Attorney Molly Chilson announced that she would not be filing any charges against Deputy Briscoe, and Briscoe returned to work for the Sheriff's Department. 2 months later, on April 23rd, Robert Dodd retired from the department and moved to Texas. However, shortly after that, on May 4th, District Attorney Molly Chilson charged him with 2 counts of second-degree official misconduct and abuse of public records. Now, these charges stemmed from the items that were found in Dodd's storage unit and from an incident in December of 2016 when Dodd altered a public record without authorization. And then things took another strange twist. Just a few days later, on May 18th, more evidence was found in the Phantom landfill in Penrose, Colorado. A worker at the landfill called Rick Ratzlaff and stated that they had picked up a dumpster from Dodd's home and that there were some disturbing items in the garbage. According to reports, the items included a computer, an envelope that was marked as evidence that contained a DVD, a videotape labeled as containing a sexual assault investigation interview, and a tackle box that was labeled FCSO Crime Scene Unit Forensic Lights. The following month, on June 6th, Robert Dodd was scheduled to appear in Fremont County Court for the first time, but his lawyer appeared for him. It was during this hearing that Dodd's attorney mentioned that the district attorney had already placed a plea deal on the table and stated that he and his client were waiting on next steps due to pending investigations. It was also during this hearing that Dolores HILTZ discovered that the entire chain of custody in her daughter's case had been broken. A few days later, on June 9th, another investigation against Dodd was opened due to the evidence that was found in the landfill in Penrose. Around 2 months later, on October 20th, the district attorney announced that she would be filing additional charges against Robert Dodd. In June of 2018, Dodd was found guilty on 3 of 4 charges. He was found guilty of abuse of public records, second-degree official misconduct refrained from duty, and second-degree official misconduct violating statute, and he was sentenced to 15 days in jail and was ordered to pay a $1,000 fine. Candace's murder remains unsolved to this day, and it's still unknown why Robert Dodd had all of those pieces of evidence that were linked to her case in his storage locker, since Dodd refused to comment. So obviously it's not hard to think about possible corruption when it comes to this case, and it doesn't just start and end with Robert Dodd. When Robert Dodd was on paid administrative leave and under investigation, he received $20,451. When Bruce Briscoe was on paid administrative leave and under investigation, he received $18,904. And during the year of 2017, the Fremont County Sheriff's Office paid almost $90,000 in total to 10 officers that were on administrative leave. Many people in the community say that the corruption doesn't just start with Dodd. They say it goes all the way up to Sheriff Beaker, who is believed to have been involved in several cover-ups. While I was doing my research, I discovered that law enforcement did actually have another suspect in Candace's case. During Dodd's trial, James HILTZ was often named as being Candace's killer. However, another name was also brought up quite a bit, and it was Heath Hyman. Heath and Candace's mother, Dolores, had been in a relationship and had separated shortly before Candace's murder. According to reports, Heath Hyman looked similar to James, and both were avid outdoorsmen. And Robert Dodd had Heath Hyman's social security card stashed in his storage unit, along with all of the other pieces of evidence that were linked to Candace's murder. It's unknown to this day how Hyman's social security card was even obtained by the Freedom County Sheriff's Office. When it comes to theories in this case, there are a few that tend to swirl around the most often, but since the case was mishandled from the beginning and the Fremont County Sheriff's Office failed in almost every single way, it's hard to know what is actually true and what isn't. There are so many inconsistencies in this case, and it's hard to figure out what the truth is and what the actual facts are. We don't even know how Candace was discovered, since Dolores has always stated she found Candace, while the autopsy report stated Candace was found by her boyfriend. So an autopsy report is pretty crucial in any investigation, and if it has information that's considered to be fact and it's not true, it's very alarming. The first theory is that Candace was murdered at random in a possible home invasion. Again, like I mentioned before, the HILTZ family lived in an extremely rural area, and some believe the home could have been the target of a burglary. It's possible that an individual or individuals saw Dolores leave and thought that no one was home. It's possible that they broke into the back door with the breaker bar and found Candace and Paige still at home. Maybe the individual or individuals didn't conceal their identity and were worried that Candace might be able to identify them. They panicked and killed her. However, to me, what points away from this theory is how personal the killing was. We have to remember that Candace was already fatally shot and the rest of her wounds were complete overkill. If it were a random intruder or intruders that just wanted to get out and not leave a witness, why would they shoot Candace so many times? And more importantly, why would they put her in a comforter under the bed? To me, that makes zero sense. Nothing was taken from the home, and the home was not ransacked, at least from what we know. That's never been released to the public, and I think that Dolores would have said something if there was evidence that something had been taken from the home, or if there's any evidence of ransacking, and Dolores has never said that. The second theory is that Candace was murdered by Heath Hyman. Now again, Heath Hyman isn't really a name you hear much about when you look at Candace's case. In fact, I didn't really know about him being a possible suspect until I researched Robert Dodd's trial. According to District Attorney Molly Chilson, Dodd had his eyes on Heath Hyman early on in the investigation and had collected evidence that proved that Heath Hyman was in the Copper Gulch area when Candace was murdered. However, aside from that, we don't really know what evidence law enforcement has against Heath Hyman, and we don't know what his relationship was like with Dolores or Candace. We know that he'd been dating Dolores and that they had recently separated, but it's unknown if they ended on good or bad terms. However, even if he and Dolores ended on bad terms, what would his motive be for brutally killing Candace? This crime is the definition of overkill. It's always possible that there could be a link there, but at this point everything would be pure speculation since no evidence has ever been released. All we know at this point is that Deputy Robert Dodd was collecting evidence that proved Heath Hyman was in the area when Candace was killed, that Heath had recently ended a relationship with Candace's mother, Dolores, and that he looked similar in appearance to Candace's brother, James. The third theory is that James HILTZ is responsible for his sister's murder, which is what the Fremont County Sheriff's Office has been pushing the entire time, even though they've never actually charged him with Candace's murder. It's well known that James had a history of mental illness. However, James did not have a history of violence. Now, if we look back to the autopsy, Candace was killed by at least 2 individuals and possibly even 3 with multiple weapons. And we know that James was so afraid of other people that he wouldn't even enter the family home unless he knew that everyone was gone. And we also know that James did not own a firearm and he did not have access to one. So with all of those facts in mind, how did James, who had no known friends and no firearms or access to them, kill Candace with multiple weapons? Who was the other person or people that were involved in the attack if James had no friends and mostly kept to himself and lived in the wilderness? Also, the back door had been pried open with a breaker bar. This was established on day 1. Why would James do this to gain entry into the home? James kept a butter knife underneath the first step of the stairs in order to pop the door open, and when Candace was found, that knife was still there and untouched. Again, James had no history of violence, so what would his motivation be? There was no evidence that pointed to James that we know of, really, and when James was found, there was nothing with him that was linked to Candace's murder. No firearms, no bloody clothing, no nothing, really. The only thing to me that does point to this theory is how Candace was found. She was found wrapped up in a comforter and hidden underneath the bed. Now, to me, that's very interesting. It's a very interesting choice regardless of who did it. Yes, killers or serial killers will sometimes kill a random victim and cover their victims for a variety of reasons. However, it's usually seen in cases where the killer feels some type of remorse, or they don't want to see what they've done, or they're trying to preserve their victim in some way. To me, this might make sense if James were responsible. Maybe he saw what he had done and he didn't want to actually see Candace there. He didn't want to see Candace in that condition, which is why he wrapped her up in the comforter and put her underneath a bed. Because to me, your way of thinking would have to be a little bit off, because obviously underneath the bed is not going to conceal Candace. There's blood everywhere. So it's definitely an interesting piece of the case, in my opinion. And to me, that does kind of point in the direction of James. But aside from that, what would his motive be? He didn't necessarily have a great relationship with his family. He didn't want to be around them. But he and Candace did not have a negative relationship, and Candace was very protective of him. So I just don't know what the exact motive would be if James were responsible. The fourth theory is that Deputy Robert Dodd either covered for someone who committed the murder or was directly involved in the murder of Candace HILTZ and tried to cover the entire thing up. Here's what we know. Deputy Dodd showed up at the HILTZ family home and asked to speak to James about a trespassing incident. Candace did not like the way that Dodd was speaking to her mother or the way that he was speaking about her brother, whom she was very protective of. During that interaction, Dodd threatened to arrest Candace, and Candace told him that she had seen him taking bribes from known drug dealers around town and threatened to tell his fellow deputies. Dodd was infuriated and left the residence. Just a few days after that, the HILTZ family dog Jackson went missing, and he was later found tied to a tree, and he had been killed with a small axe. Both the bloody rope and a bloody axe were found in Dodd's storage unit several years later. Why? On the day of the murder, Dolores left the family home to run a few errands while Candace and Paige stayed at home. Dolores said she then returned around 3 hours later and found pools of blood, blood spatter, and bloody drag marks throughout the home. She then found Candace stuffed underneath the bed in a green comforter. According to the autopsy, Candace had been killed by at least 2 to 3 people with 3 different weapons. The killing was so brutal that Candace was nearly decapitated. The autopsy also stated that Candace was shot in the front and in the back. When we look at who may have had access to these weapons, one option seems more likely than the other. Would it be James, a man who doesn't own a firearm and was so afraid of people, including his own family, that he would live in the woods for extended periods of time? Or Robert Dodd, who was a deputy and had associates, coworkers, and friends and easy access to weapons? Is it possible that Candace was onto something when she told Robert Dodd that she had seen him taking envelopes from local drug dealers? Did Robert Dodd become so enraged that he felt like he needed to get rid of her? Was he afraid of something getting out? Were other people in the department involved? To me, it's clear that whoever did it knew exactly what they were going to do, and to me it's obvious that the killing of Jackson, the family dog, was done for 2 reasons. The first reason would be to send the family a message of some kind. And the second would be to get rid of Jackson, since he was protective and whoever did it did not want the dog around for the attack. Let's say Dodd wasn't actually involved. Why did he make the decisions that he did in this case? He and Briscoe and others did absolutely nothing to protect the crime scene and didn't even seal it off. They left behind huge pieces of evidence and provided the family with 0 answers. Somehow, from the moment they walked into the scene, they determined that James was responsible, even though no real evidence indicated that James had anything to do with it. To this day, James is considered to be the only suspect in Candace's murder, but he's never actually been charged for her murder. If the evidence against James is truly there, wouldn't they have charged him by this point? If Dodd wasn't involved, then why did he have valuable, and this isn't just small pieces of evidence, this is valuable pieces of evidence hidden away in his storage locker. The socks and shirt that were found bloodied and in his storage unit were items of clothing that Candace was wearing on the day of her murder. If Dodd and the department wasn't directly involved, they did everything they possibly could to contaminate the evidence and leave the crime unsolved. To me, this case is absolutely unreal and infuriating. Candace was a 17-year-old student and mother who had a bright future ahead of her. She was loved by everyone that she knew, and she believed in justice and the law. She stood up for those who were being bullied, and she was passionate about what she believed in. There's no doubt in my mind that Candace would have gone on to do remarkable things, and all of that was robbed from her. It's clear to me that the Fremont County Sheriff's Department is hiding something. I don't know to what degree, I don't know what's really going on, but to me it's obvious that they are hiding something. Dodd is hiding something and most likely knows more than what he's saying. And what's even more shocking is that none of this was really covered on the news. Here you have a teenager who was brutally murdered while her baby daughter watched, and it's later discovered that the investigator in charge of the case stole her bloody clothing and other evidence linked to her murder and kept it in his storage unit for years. Why isn't there more coverage on this? Everyone who hears this story should be outraged. Candace's brutal murder wasn't taken seriously from the beginning. They did a half-assed job. I've never heard of investigators going into a crime scene and leaving behind crucial pieces of evidence, including shell casings and the bloody comforter that the victim was wrapped in. Who does that? I've never heard of investigators refusing to speak to a family that has valid concerns and questions. I've never heard of a deputy taking bloody evidence and hiding it in his own personal storage unit for years and years and years. I've never heard of a deputy keeping critical evidence at his private residence and then throwing it away in his dumpster. And after all of the charges that were filed against Robert Dodd, he only received 15 days in jail. Where is the justice for Candace? Where are the answers for her family? Because of the police's corruption or incompetence, or maybe a mixture of both, this case will likely never be solved due to the evidence either not being collected or due to it being contaminated, and that should anger every single one of us. Imagine if it happened to your loved one. This was not Dodd or Briscoe's first rodeo, and they knew what they were doing when they left those pieces of evidence behind. Due to their actions, even if a clear suspect were to emerge and charges were filed, the defense could always argue that the evidence was mishandled and contaminated. My heart breaks for Candace and her family. I cannot even begin to imagine what they are going through. I hope one day that some type of justice will be received and that her family will receive some answers. However, as a society, we have to make sure that those in power are being held accountable every single day. No one is above the law. It does not matter if you're wealthy. It doesn't matter if you're an FBI agent. It doesn't matter if you're a deputy. It doesn't matter if you are the President of the United States. No one is above the law, and that is something that we need to demand as a society. The department and justice system in Colorado failed Candace and her family, and it's important that more and more people know about her story and the amazing person that she was. It's important that Candace is never forgotten, and I hope that by telling this story, she never is. I hope that more people see this video. I'm going to leave a ton of articles down below if you want to share them. It's important for us to raise awareness on these types of things. Again, people need to be held accountable. It doesn't matter if you have power or not. And like I said at the beginning of this video, it reminds me so much of my own family member's murder. There was a lot of corruption going on. It's very hard for me to talk about, and when I read up on Candace's case, I just felt heartbroken because my family went through the exact same thing. So that's why I'm a little bit more fiery and bold with this, because I do believe that there is something going on in that area in the justice system. So with all that being said, I'm not really sure what happened to Candace. I have a good idea of what I think, but I'd love to know what you think. What do you think happened to Candace? Do you think that her brother was responsible? Do you think it's an unknown individual? Or do you think it had something to do with Robert Dodd and the Sheriff's Department? Let me know what you think down in the comments below. If you like this video, please give it a big, huge thumbs up for me, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you can see when all my videos are uploaded. With that, I'm going to go. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video and for taking the time to learn more about Candace's story today. With that, I'm gonna go, and I will see you guys on my next video. Bye.